The song was playing through the outdoor speakers when I pulled in. Old country, slow tempo, a man's voice that sounded sanded down. I didn't recognize it, but my wife had described it to me 3 days earlier, sitting on the edge of our bed at 1 a.m, and I knew it the way you know a smell from a house you lived in as a kid. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was at a Shell station off Route 32 in daylight, putting $14 of gas in a Toyota. Then the woman at the next island stopped pumping. That's the part I keep starting from because it was the moment I had to choose something, and I chose wrong. It was a Wednesday, 3:40 in the afternoon. The sky was the kind of pale that doesn't commit to weather, and the lot was about a third full. A pickup at pump 2, a minivan at pump 5, a station wagon waiting at the air pump that was always supposedly broken. I'd taken the exit on purpose. I'd told myself I needed gas, even though I had a quarter tank and our other car had a full one. I'd told myself I just wanted to see the place. I'd told my wife I was running to Lowe's. I want to be honest about that because the rest of this is going to be hard to believe. And I'd rather start with the small lie I told than the bigger ones the world started telling me afterward. The Shell station on Route 32 sits in the kind of suburban gap you don't really register when you're driving. There's a strip mall a quarter mile east, a nail salon, a Subway, a tax preparer that's only open from January through April, and a stretch of pine and chain link west toward the off-ramp. The station itself looks like every Shell station built in the early 70s. Yellow canopy, 6 pumps in 3 islands, a small mart with a glass front and a metal bar across the bottom of the door so the bell hits it when it swings. There's a car wash behind the building that's never been open any time I've passed. Nothing about the place looks wrong. That's the first thing I want anyone listening to understand. If you drove past it tomorrow, you wouldn't notice it. You'd notice the Wendy's 2 miles up. You'd notice the elementary school sign that flashes the speed limit. You wouldn't notice this. I parked at pump 4 because pump 3's card reader had a yellow out of service sticker on it, the kind that always seems to be on at least one pump at every station I've ever been to. I got out of the car. I swiped my card. I selected regular. I lifted the nozzle. That's when I heard it. The speakers under the canopy were tinny in the way old outdoor speakers are. Tinny, a little blown, a little wet from years of weather, and the song coming out of them was slow enough that I'd been pumping for maybe 4 seconds before I realized it was a song at all and not just ambient hum. A steel guitar held a note longer than steel guitars usually do. A man's voice came in underneath it, low and cracked and patient, and sang a line I couldn't quite make out. I stopped pumping. I want to describe what my wife had told me, because the description is what made me stop. 3 nights earlier, our daughter, 11 weeks old and finally asleep in the bassinet beside our bed, my wife had said, "It's an old country song. The guy sounds like he's been crying for a week. The guitar holds the notes too long. And there's a chorus that just says, 'The long way home,' over and over. But you can never quite hear it the first time." I had nodded. I hadn't asked her to play it for me. She wouldn't have been able to. That was part of what she said next. "It's not on Spotify. It's not anywhere." I checked for 9 months. The speakers above me played a chorus I couldn't quite catch. A man's voice held a syllable that might have been home and might have been known, and the steel guitar dropped a note that didn't resolve. I looked at the digital readout on the pump. $3.29. The numbers were climbing. I stood there with my hand on the nozzle and tried to be reasonable. There are tens of thousands of old country songs. There are old country songs my wife had never heard, and there were old country songs I had never heard, and any of them could plausibly have a steel guitar and a chorus about going home. The phrase, The Long Way Home is in maybe 200 different songs. I could have been wrong. I was probably wrong. I was almost certainly wrong. I kept pumping. The pump clicked off at $13.98, 2 cents short of 14, and I squeezed the handle one more time to round it up. The display jumped to 14 even. I returned the nozzle to the cradle. I asked for a receipt. The receipt printer made the noise it always makes. A little zipper sound, and produced nothing. The screen said, "See attendant." I didn't go inside. I want to be clear about that because later when I told my wife the story, she wanted to know whether I'd gone inside, and I'd said no. And she nodded the way people nod when you've passed a test you didn't know you were taking. I didn't go inside. I told myself it was because I didn't need a receipt for $14. The truth was, I didn't want to walk past the speakers. I was getting back in the car when the woman at the next island dropped her nozzle. She was at pump 6, on the far side of the island from me, and I'd been peripherally aware of her. A small woman in her 40s, dark hair pulled back, jeans and a navy windbreaker, a silver Honda Civic, with a child's car seat, visible in the back. She'd pulled in maybe a minute after me. She'd been pumping the way people pump, half watching the numbers, half watching nothing. She let go of the nozzle. I don't mean she clicked it back into the cradle. I mean she opened her hand and let it fall, and the nozzle hit the ground and didn't shut off the way they're supposed to. Gas was coming out of it onto the concrete, a thin, pale stream, and she didn't react to that at all. She wasn't looking at the pump. She was looking up, at the canopy, at the speaker. The second verse had just started. I couldn't make out the words. I could make out the shape of the words, the rhythm, the way the man's voice came down on certain syllables, and I watched her face change while it happened. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something quieter than fear. It was the face of someone hearing a name that they hadn't been called in a long time. She turned. She walked to her car. She got in. She put it in drive. She pulled away from the pump with the gas cap still open and the nozzle still on the ground. I should say here that this is the part of the story where if you're a reasonable person, you say she got an urgent call or she got sick or she remembered she left a stove on. That's what I told myself. That's what I told myself for about 6 seconds. Then I noticed the gas was still running. It was running onto the concrete in a slow, widening stain, and nobody else in the lot had noticed yet. And the speakers above me were still playing, and the man was still holding a syllable I couldn't catch. And I walked over to pump 6 and lifted the nozzle off the ground and snapped the lever down and clicked it back into the cradle. The pump was still ticking. $62. $63. I hit the red emergency stop. The numbers froze at 63.41. I looked up. The canopy speaker directly above pump 6 was a little black grill, weather-stained, the kind you stop seeing after the first time you stand under one. The song kept playing. I could feel the bass in the metal of the canopy strut next to me. I want to tell you the next thing happened immediately. It didn't. I stood there for what was probably 10 seconds and felt something I haven't been able to name yet. Something between recognition and embarrassment. The feeling of standing at the edge of a conversation you've already been having for years without knowing it. Then I walked back to my car. The bell on the Mart door rang. A man came out, middle-aged, blue work shirt with a name patch I couldn't read from where I was standing, a fountain drink in his hand, and walked to a pickup at pump 2. The bell rang for him. I heard it clearly. Ding-clack against the metal bar. I tried to remember the bell ringing for the woman in the windbreaker. It hadn't. I'm not saying I'm sure of that. Memory is a bad witness, and at 3:40 in the afternoon, I wasn't auditing my surroundings. I was pumping gas. But I had been turned toward her island when she got out of her car a minute earlier. She'd come from inside the Mart. She must have. The Civic had been there before she was. I'd have heard the bell when she went in. I'd have heard it when she came out. I didn't remember it either way. The bell rang again as a young woman with a stroller went into the mart. The chime was distinctive. It wasn't subtle. It was the kind of bell that gets your attention even when you're not paying attention. I got in the Toyota. I started the engine. The radio came on at the volume I'd left it at. Quiet. A podcast I'd been half listening to that morning, and I turned it down further until it was almost off, because I wanted to hear the canopy speakers as I pulled away. I wanted to know whether the song faded the way songs are supposed to fade when you drive away from a speaker. I pulled out of the pump bay. The chorus came in just as I reached the lot exit. The long way home. I caught it that time, half of it, the home clearer than the rest. I turned right onto Route 32. The speakers should have dropped behind me. The song should have thinned and folded into engine noise within 50 feet. It didn't. I'm aware of how this is going to sound. I'm not saying the song followed me. I'm saying that for a stretch of about a quarter mile, past the strip mall, past the tax preparer's empty window, I could still hear it at the same volume I'd heard it standing under the canopy. Not louder, not closer. The same as if the speakers had a range they shouldn't have had, or as if the song had decided to stay in the car with me until I noticed it was there. It cut out at the elementary school sign. The flashing speed limit caught my eye. 25, when children present. And the song stopped, and the Toyota's cabin filled up with the small, specific quiet of a car that had been carrying a sound and wasn't anymore. My ears adjusted. The podcast was still playing under my thumb on the volume dial. I turned it back up and didn't hear a word of it. A quarter mile ahead of me, the silver Honda Civic was at a red light. I hadn't been looking for her. I'd been driving the way you drive after something has happened that you don't want to think about. Eyes forward, hands at 10 and 2, a reasonable man going home. And there she was. Brake lights, turn signal, the same Navy windbreaker visible through the back window. The child's car seat empty. The light went green. She turned left, away from Route 32 into the access road that loops behind the Wendy's. I followed her. I'm going to stop here and be honest about something because I think it matters. I have been married for 9 years. I have a daughter who is 11 weeks old. I am a person who, on any normal Wednesday afternoon, would not follow a stranger out of a gas station. I would have driven home. I would have called my wife at the next stoplight and said something weird just happened, and she'd have said, "What kind of weird?" And I'd have laughed at myself by the time I got to our driveway. I didn't call my wife. I followed the Civic into the access road, and the access road went around behind the Wendy's, and the Civic pulled into a parking space at the back of the Wendy's lot, far from the building, near the dumpsters. The kind of space you take when you don't want to be near other cars. And stopped. I parked 4 spaces away. She didn't get out. She was sitting with her hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, exactly the way I'd been sitting in the Toyota a minute ago. And she was looking straight ahead at the chain link behind the dumpsters, and she was crying without making any noise that I could see. I sat in my car. She sat in hers. The Wendy's drive-through speaker on the far side of the building was making the distorted bark it always makes. Somebody ordering a Frosty, the speaker mangling the word, and a kid on a bike rode past the lot entrance with a backpack that said St. Mary's in white letters. I should have left. I'm going to keep saying that because it's the truest thing I can say about that afternoon. I should have left. I should have backed out of that space and gone home and told my wife everything before I made it worse. Instead, I opened my door. I'm telling you this in the order it happened because I don't want to make it sound smarter than it was. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I was going to say to her. I knew that she had heard the song too, and I knew that she had reacted to it the way my wife had described reacting to it 9 months ago, and I knew that I needed her to tell me what the second verse said. I walked across the asphalt toward her Civic. She saw me coming in her side mirror. Her hands didn't leave the steering wheel. She watched me approach, the way you watch a slow animal approach. without surprise, without alarm, with something that looked almost like recognition. And when I got to her driver's side window, she rolled it down before I had to ask. She said, "Was your wife pregnant when she stopped here?" I hadn't told her I had a wife. I want to tell you what I said back to her, but I'm going to come back to that because the rest of this chapter doesn't make sense without going further back than the Wendy's parking lot. It doesn't make sense without the night 3 days earlier when my wife sat on the edge of our bed at 1 a.m. and told me about the song. And that doesn't make sense without 9 years of the window. So I'm going to tell it the way she told it, out of order, from the smallest detail outward. My wife is named Hannah. We met in a coffee shop in Charlotte in the fall of 2015 when she was finishing her last year of a nursing program and I was 3 months into a job I hated at a logistics company. She was the first woman I'd ever dated who didn't apologize for her own opinions, and she was the first woman I'd ever dated who corrected herself out loud when she realized she was wrong about something. Both of those things I noticed on the second date. I knew I was going to marry her by the third. I'm telling you that because I want you to understand who she is before I tell you about the window. Hannah is not afraid of things. She works night shifts in a step-down cardiac unit and has held the hand of more dying people than I can count. She drives our old Toyota in ice storms because she doesn't trust me in ice. She killed a copperhead in our garden last summer with a garden hoe and didn't mention it until I noticed the hoe had blood on it. The first time I told her I loved her in 2016, she said, "Good, I was getting tired of waiting," and I'm still not sure if she was kidding. This is not a person who flinches. We got married in 2017. We moved to the house we live in now, a small split level at the end of a cul-de-sac called Birch Crest Drive, 11 minutes from her hospital, 22 minutes from my office with a back deck that looks at a row of pine trees I didn't plant and don't know the age of. The route between our house and her hospital, the route we drive every day, the route I have driven in my sleep and in the rain and in the dark and at 3 a.m. when she was paged in for an emergency, runs along Route 32. The Shell station sits at mile marker 84. I noticed the window thing in the summer of 2016. We weren't married yet. She was driving us back from a movie at the Cineplex up by the lake. The old kind of date. Popcorn and a mediocre comedy and her laughing at the parts that weren't funny. And the air conditioning in her car wasn't working that summer. She'd had the windows down for the entire drive. I remember the wind in her hair. The way she'd take her left hand off the wheel to keep it out of her face. The way the radio kept losing signal because we were near the lake. About a quarter mile before the Shell station, without slowing down, without looking at me, she rolled her window up. I didn't think anything of it. I rolled mine up too because the wind was getting cold. We passed the station. The pumps were lit. I remember a green Subaru at one of the islands. I remember a kid pushing a shopping cart across the lot toward the dumpster at the side of the mart. The kind of details you keep without meaning to. Half a mile past the station, she rolled her window back down. I asked her if she was cold. She said, "No, I just don't like the smell at that station." That's all. I don't like the smell at that station. It was a perfectly normal thing to say. Plenty of people don't like the smell at gas stations. I didn't think about it again. It's so easy not to think about something for 9 years. I started counting backwards last week after she finally told me, and I started realizing how many times I'd watched her do it without seeing her do it. The window goes up at a quarter mile before. It goes down half a mile after. The trigger is consistent. I've tested it in my head. Summer, winter, rain, snow. Pregnant, not pregnant. With me in the car, with me driving, with me not in the car at all. She once mentioned, casually, 3 years ago, that she always rolls up the window at the Shell on 32 because it just smells. And I'd nodded. And I hadn't thought about the fact that she'd brought it up unprompted on a day when I hadn't been with her at the station. She didn't want me to ask. That's what I understand now. She didn't bring it up because she wanted me to know. She brought it up because she wanted to make sure I'd accepted the explanation so I would never ask the real question. She'd been doing maintenance on me. Quiet, patient, marriage-long maintenance. I want to stop and say something here because it's important. I don't blame her. I will never blame her. She was protecting me from something she didn't understand and didn't want to give weight to. By speaking it, she was doing what people do when they're afraid of something they can't name. She was building a house around it, brick by brick, until the thing was sealed off in a room nobody opened. The pregnancy is what cracked the room. She got pregnant in February of last year. Easy pregnancy by everyone's standards. No morning sickness past week 10. Strong heartbeat. Good ultrasounds. She kept working through her second trimester, and I drove her to her appointments because I wanted to, and we took the long way to the hospital because she insisted, even when we were running late. That was the first thing I noticed. In June, when she was about 4 months along, she came home from a shift and I was making pasta, and she walked in and put her keys on the counter and said, "I went the wrong way today and ended up at the Shell on 32. I asked her if it was bad. I meant the traffic. She said I had to get gas. I went there. I don't want to go back. That was all she said about it that night. Her voice was steady. Her hands weren't shaking. She washed her face and ate the pasta and went to bed at the time she normally went to bed, and the next morning she told me, very calmly, that we were taking a different route to the hospital from now on. She drew it for me on the back of an envelope. 2 left turns through the neighborhood north of Route 32, a small lake, a blue fire hydrant on the corner of Birchcrest and Pinehurst that someone, years ago, had painted that color for reasons no one I've talked to has ever been able to explain. Then back onto 32, a mile past the station, 11 extra minutes. I asked her why. She said, "I just don't want to take that road right now. Please. I want to tell you I pushed harder. I want to tell you I cared enough to ask a third time. I didn't." She'd said please. And Hannah doesn't say please for things she doesn't mean. And we were 4 months into a pregnancy that was hers to feel. And if she wanted to drive 11 minutes out of the way for 9 months, then we would drive 11 minutes out of the way for 9 months. I am telling you this so you understand. I let her have the silence. I thought I was being a good husband. I think I might have been a coward. The detour became routine. I learned the turns. I learned the blue fire hydrant. I learned the yellow house on Pinehurst with the basketball hoop in the driveway, and the rusted weather vane on the roof that looked like a rooster missing 1 foot. I drove the detour even when she wasn't in the car because it would have felt like a small betrayal not to. She gave birth in November. Our daughter, 8 pounds, 2 ounces, black hair that's mostly fallen out and grown back lighter. A small constellation of birthmarks at the base of her neck that looked like someone tipped a salt shaker once. We named her Margaret, after Hannah's mother, who died of pancreatic cancer in 2019, 5 months before our wedding, 4 years before her granddaughter would be born. We call our daughter Maggie. The night 3 days ago, Hannah finally told me. It was 1 a.m. Maggie had finally gone down in the bassinet. I was awake because I hadn't fallen asleep yet, and Hannah was awake because she'd been awake. She sat up against the headboard in the small lamplit way you sit up at 1 a.m. when you've decided you're going to say something you've been avoiding. She said, "Can I tell you something?" It wasn't a question. She told me what happened in June. She told me she'd taken the wrong exit because she'd been on the phone with the hospital about a shift change, and she'd ended up at the Shell on 32 with less than a quarter tank, and she'd decided to fill up because it would have been ridiculous not to. She told me about the song. Slow tempo, steel guitar that held the notes too long, a man's voice that sounded like he'd been crying for a week. A chorus she couldn't quite catch the first time, and then the second time it played, she heard it. The long way home, the long way home. And she remembered standing under the canopy with the nozzle in her hand and thinking, I have heard this song before. She didn't know where. She told me she was going to come back to that. She told me about the man at the next pump. He was older, maybe 60, in a brown work jacket, And I want to flag that because it's the first time the brown jacket comes up, and I didn't think anything of it at the time, but I'm thinking about it now. He'd been pumping gas at pump 3. He hadn't been looking at her. She'd been turned slightly toward the mart, toward the bell on the door, watching a kid push a stroller out, and the man at pump 3 had said something to her without raising his voice. He'd said, "How's the baby, Bertie? I want to stop here." Bertie was Hannah's grandmother's name for her mother's mother, a woman named Rose, who died in 1998 when Hannah was 13, in a house in eastern Tennessee, in a town with one stoplight and a Hardee's. Rose had called Hannah Bertie because, according to family story, the first sound Hannah made as an infant was apparently a small whistled trill, like a finch. And Rose had said, "That's no baby, that's a little bird." And the name stuck for the 4 years between Hannah's birth and the family's move to North Carolina, after which she saw her grandmother only at holidays. Rose was the only person who ever called her Bertie. After Rose died in 1998, Hannah told me, no one called her that again. Her mother wouldn't use it. Her father had never used it. Her older brother had called her Han. By the time we met in 2015, the name was so far buried in her childhood that she didn't think of it as a name. She thought of it as a sound a dead woman used to make when she was happy to see her. She had never told me about it. I had been married to her for 8 years, and I had never heard the word Bertie in our house. She had told me about Rose. Of course, she told me about the house in Tennessee, the Hardee's, the way Rose used to sing Patsy Cline in the kitchen. But she had never given me the nickname. Not once. Not on a second date. Not at the wedding. Not in the 8 years, is between. I asked her, sitting up in bed at 1 a.m., if she'd ever told anyone the name, and she said no. She said her brother might remember it. She said she wasn't sure her father did. She said the man at pump 3 had used it like he'd known her since she was an infant. She told me she dropped the nozzle. She told me she'd looked over at him, and he was still facing his own pump, his back partially turned, his hand on the cradle, and she could only see the side of his face. Gray hair under a brown cap, a jaw that looked like it had been sanded, and she'd opened her mouth to ask him what he'd said, and the song had started its second verse, and the bell on the mart door had not rung, even though a woman had just walked in. She'd put the nozzle back. She'd gotten in her car. She'd driven away. She'd stopped at a CVS 2 miles up and sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes, trying to decide whether to call me. She'd decided not to. She'd come home. She'd put her keys on the counter. She'd told me she'd taken the wrong exit and didn't want to go back. I asked her, sitting up in our bed 9 months later, why she'd never told me. She said, because I didn't believe it. And then she said the part I haven't been able to stop thinking about. She said, there was another time. I waited. She said, I was 19. It was 2011. I was driving back from college on spring break, and I stopped at a Shell station off Route 32, the same one, because I needed gas and I didn't know the area. There was a man at the next pump in a brown jacket. I don't remember his face. I remember him saying, how's school? Bertie, without looking at me. I remember the song was playing. I remember leaving without filling up. I remember I called my mom from a parking lot up the road, and she said it was probably some old guy who knew Rose. And I remember she said, don't go back there, sweetheart, just don't go back there. And I didn't go back. And within about a week, I had stopped thinking about it. I had stopped thinking about it so completely that when I pulled into that station last June, I didn't recognize it. I looked at the canopy and the speakers and the bell on the door, and I felt like I had never been there in my life. I felt that for about 10 seconds. And then I heard the song, and then the man said, Bertie, and then I remembered all of it at once, like opening a closet I didn't know I had a key to. She looked at me. She said, why did I forget? I didn't have an answer. I still don't. I want to tell you that I lay there next to my wife, at 1 a.m, with our daughter sleeping in the bassinet beside the bed, and I felt the way you feel when somebody you love tells you a story you don't know what to do with. I felt afraid for her. I felt afraid for Maggie. I felt the strange, small embarrassment of being told a thing that had always been true and that I'd lived alongside for 9 years without knowing it. I told her I believed her. She said, "You don't have to." I said I did. She fell asleep around 2. I didn't. I lay there listening to Maggie's breath in the bassinet and to the small clicks the house makes at night, the refrigerator cycling, the heat kicking on, the deck creaking under temperature change. And I thought about the word birdie, and I thought about how I'd never heard my wife use it, and I thought about whether that meant something. I thought about a man at a pump in a brown jacket in 2011 and 2024, 13 years apart, using the same name without looking up. I want to be careful here. I want to be honest about what occurred to me and what didn't. It didn't occur to me that the man could be the same man. Not yet. That came later. Lying in bed that night, the simplest version was already enough that someone had known a private thing about my wife twice, at the same place, at a 13-year remove, and that the song had been playing both times. That was already too much. I got out of bed around 4. I went to the kitchen for water. I stood at the sink with the tap running, and the window above the sink was cracked open a couple of inches the way Hannah likes it for air, and from somewhere very far away, far enough that I wasn't sure I was hearing it, far enough that I told myself I was making it up, I heard a steel guitar hold a note longer than steel guitars usually hold a note. I closed the window. I came back to bed. I didn't tell her. 3 days later, I drove to the Shell station on Route 32, and I told myself I was running to Lowe's, and I put $14 of gas in the Toyota, and a woman in a Navy windbreaker dropped her nozzle in the second verse and drove away with her gas cap open. And I followed her into a Wendy's parking lot, and she rolled down her window before I had to ask her to, and she said, "Was your wife pregnant when she stopped here?" I want to tell you what I said back. I want to tell you what she said next. I'm going to. I just need a chapter to do it. What I said back was this: "Yes. How did you know?" And she looked at me with the same face she'd had under the canopy when she heard the second verse. That face of a person being called a name nobody had used in a long time. And she said, "Because she's why I came back today." I didn't understand that yet. I am still trying to understand it. I think understanding it is what the rest of this is going to be about. But before I tell you the rest of what she said, I have to tell you what I did the next morning. Because the next morning I drove the detour route alone, and the blue fire hydrant on the corner of Pinehurst and Birchcrest was still there, and the yellow house was still there, and the basketball hoop was still there, and everything was the way it had always been, except for one thing, and that one thing was Maggie. I should explain something before I get to that morning, because I want to be fair to myself, and I want to be fair to Hannah. The morning after she told me about Birdie, we didn't talk about it. I made coffee. She nursed Maggie in the chair by the window. I asked her if she'd slept. She said some. I asked her if she wanted toast. She said yes, please. We moved around each other in the kitchen the way you move around your spouse when you've decided by mutual unspoken agreement that something said at 1 a.m. belongs to the night and not the morning. I think we both wanted that to be true. I think we were both wrong to want it. She left for her shift at 7:15. She took the detour. I watched her car turn onto Pinehurst from the kitchen window, and I watched her brake lights tap once at the blue fire hydrant, the way they always do, and then she was gone past the yellow house and around the bend, and I was alone with Maggie on a Thursday morning that was supposed to be ordinary. I had the day off. That's important. I had the day off because I'd traded shifts with a coworker the week before, and I'd planned to use it to clean out the garage, which had been on my list since before Maggie was born. I had a coffee. I changed Maggie's diaper. I put her in the swing in the living room. I went out to the garage at 8:30 and stood there for about 10 minutes, looking at the boxes I was supposed to sort, and then I went back inside, picked Maggie up out of the swing, put her in her car seat, and drove to the Shell station on Route 32. I want to be precise about why. It wasn't the song. The song was real, but I hadn't decided to do anything about it yet. It was the word birdie. It was the way Hannah had said I had never told anyone, and the way I had believed her, and the way I had then lain awake for 2 hours, running through every conversation we'd ever had with my mother, with her brother, with our friends from college, looking for a moment when she could have mentioned the word and forgotten, and not finding one. I'd made a list in my head. I'd checked it twice. I'd come up empty. A man at a pump on Route 32 had said her grandmother's nickname for her in 2011. The same man, or a man wearing the same kind of jacket, had said it again in 2024. Hannah had no rational explanation for it. I had no rational explanation for it. So I was going to drive to the place with my 11-week-old daughter in the back seat and look at it in daylight and prove to myself that it was just a gas station. I want to flag that for anyone listening. I want you to notice what I just said. I was bringing my daughter. I want you to notice it because I didn't notice it. I got on Route 32 going east. I drove past the elementary school sign and 25 when children present, the same flashing yellow, and past the strip mall with the tax preparer that nobody ever goes into. And as I came up on the Shell, I let off the gas a little. The way you let off when you want to look without slowing enough to commit. The canopy was yellow. The pumps were lit. There was a green Subaru at one of the islands. There was a man standing at pump 3 with his back to the road. He was wearing a brown work jacket. I kept driving. I want to say I made a deliberate choice to keep driving. I want to say I thought about it and decided not to stop. The truth is I didn't decide anything. My foot didn't move to the brake. My hands didn't turn the wheel. The Toyota carried me past the station the way a current carries something that isn't paddling. I was a quarter mile down the road before I realized I'd been holding my breath. I exhaled. I let myself look in the rearview mirror. The man at pump 3 hadn't turned around. He was still facing his pump, both hands at his sides. The brown jacket rounded across his shoulders in the way old men's jackets round when they've been worn a long time. I couldn't see his face. I had never been going to see his face. I watched him until the curve in the road took him out of the mirror. That's when Maggie started crying. She didn't fuss. She didn't build to it. She went from quiet to crying in a single breath, the kind of cry that babies do when something has happened, not when they're hungry or wet. And I checked the dashboard clock without thinking about why. It was 8:48. I should say here that Maggie was, at 11 weeks, an easy baby. Hannah had reminded me of this often, in the half-rueful way you remind yourself when you suspect you're going to have a hard time later. Maggie slept. Maggie ate. Maggie cried for about 30 minutes a night between 5 and 5:30 in the evening and was otherwise calm. She did not cry randomly in the car at 8:48 in the morning. She had never done that. I pulled into the parking lot of an auto parts store half a mile up the road. I got out. I opened the back door. Maggie was red-faced and arching her back against the car seat straps in the specific way she did when something had startled her. A slammed door, a sneeze too close to her face, and I picked her up and held her against my chest and walked back and forth in the parking lot for about 3 minutes until she settled. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out one-handed. It was Hannah. The text said she just woke up screaming. Is she okay? It had come in at 8:47. I want to make sure I'm telling this part right. I had Maggie. Maggie was in my arms in an auto parts store parking lot. Hannah was at the hospital, 11 minutes away by detour, 14 minutes away by Route 32. Hannah hadn't seen Maggie since 7:15. I read the text 3 times. The first time I told myself my wife had a mother's instinct and had felt something shift in her daughter from across town. That happens. People talk about that. The second time, I told myself she was probably just texting from a break, checking in, the way she always checked in. And the wording was just the wording she happened to use. The third time, I scrolled up and saw that Hannah hadn't texted me anything else that morning. She didn't know where I was. She didn't know I'd taken Maggie out. She thought, as far as I could tell, that Maggie was still in the swing in the living room. I called her. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was wrong, not panicked, but pulled tight at the edges the way it gets when she's holding something off. She said, "Is she okay? What happened?" I just had this feeling like she was crying, but I couldn't hear her just for a second. I told her Maggie was fine. I told her I was at an auto parts store buying wiper blades. I'm not proud of that. She asked me when I'd left. I told her about 10 minutes ago. She asked me if I'd taken the detour. I said yes. There was a pause on the other end of the line that was longer than it needed to be, and she said, "Okay, drive safe," and I said, "I love you." And she said it back. And we hung up. I stood in the auto parts store parking lot with Maggie on my shoulder, and I checked the timestamp on the text again. 8:47. I'd looked in the rearview mirror at the man in the brown jacket at 8:48. Maggie had started crying within a few seconds after that. I'd pulled into the parking lot at 8:50. The text had come in 3 minutes before I'd looked at my phone, which meant Hannah had felt something at the moment I was driving past the station, not the moment Maggie had cried. Hannah had felt it about 30 to 60 seconds before Maggie had reacted. I sat in the Toyota for a long time after I put Maggie back in the car seat. I want to admit something here because I think it matters and because I think other husbands would understand it. I sat in that parking lot and tried to invent a chronology where it could go the other way. I tried to make Hannah's text be a response to Maggie's cry instead of a precursor to it. I held my phone in my hand and I scrolled and I tapped and I checked the timestamp from 3 different angles, and I willed it to be 8:48 instead of 8:47. It stayed 8:47. I started the car. I drove home the long way. I took the detour in reverse. The back way through Pinehurst, the blue fire hydrant on the corner, the yellow house with the basketball hoop. And the whole time I was driving, I kept glancing at Maggie in the rear view. She was asleep again by the time I made the second turn. Her small face had relaxed back into the round, slack 11-week-old face she had when she wasn't experiencing anything. She slept the rest of the way home. I want to tell you I had the rest of the day to think about it, but I didn't. The day disappeared the way days disappear when you have an infant. Bottles, naps, a load of laundry, a brief panic about a diaper rash that turned out to be nothing. And by the time Hannah came home at 6:30, I had moved the morning into a part of my head where I could keep it without dropping it. Hannah came in. Maggie was asleep on the couch next to me. Hannah kissed her on the head and asked me how the day had been. And I said, "Fine." And she said, "Good." And we ate leftover pasta standing in the kitchen. She didn't ask me about the detour again. I noticed that. I want to skip ahead to about 9 that night, because the part I keep coming back to is the part with the humming. We'd put Maggie down in the bassinet in our room around 8:30. She'd been fussy. Not the morning kind of fussy, just a normal evening fussy. And Hannah had been walking her in slow loops around the bedroom while I cleaned the kitchen. I could hear them through the open door. Hannah was talking to her. "Shh, Maggie, Mama's here. Mama's here, sweetheart." The kind of soft running monologue Hannah had developed in the first week of Maggie's life, which she did almost unconsciously now, the way some people hum while they cook. She started humming. I noticed it because she usually didn't hum. Hannah's not musical. She'd be the first to tell you. She sings happy birthday, and that's about it. But she was humming a melody to Maggie. Slow, low, 3 or 4 notes that came down in a small descending pattern and resolved on a note that didn't quite resolve. I stopped what I was doing. I had a wet plate in my hand. I stood at the kitchen counter and listened to my wife hum and felt something underneath the listening that I wouldn't have been able to describe in the moment. It was the same feeling I'd had at the gas station the day before. The feeling of standing at the edge of a conversation I'd been having for years without knowing it. I knew the melody. I didn't know how I knew the melody. I had not heard my wife hum it before. She was humming the chorus of the song. I want to be careful here. I don't know that for a fact. I want to be honest about what I know and what I'm assigning to memory after the fact. What I know is that she was humming a 4-note phrase that came down and resolved unsteadily, and that when I closed my eyes, I could match it to the canopy speakers at the Shell station on Route 32, and that it felt like the same melody. I want to leave space for the possibility that I was wrong. I went to the bedroom doorway. Hannah had her back to me. She was swaying slightly, Maggie against her shoulder, and Maggie's eyes were closed. The lamp on the nightstand was on. Hannah was humming. The window above the dresser was cracked open about 2 inches, the same 2 inches she always left it for air, and the curtain wasn't moving because there wasn't any wind. I said her name, quietly. She turned. She smiled at me. She kept humming for one more measure and then stopped. The way you trail off when someone's looking at you. I asked her what she was humming. She tilted her head. She thought about it. She said, I have no idea. It's just been stuck in my head all day. I asked her if she remembered where she'd heard it. She said no. She said, I think it's something my mom used to hum, maybe. She said it without any weight. She said it the way you say, I think I had eggs this morning. Maybe a small offhand thing she wasn't going to chase. I told her it was nice. I went back to the kitchen and finished the dishes. I poured a glass of water I didn't drink. I stood at the sink with the window cracked open above it, the same 2 inches Hannah always left it, and I listened to my wife in the bedroom hum the rest of the chorus to our daughter. She did 3 more passes of it, each one quieter than the last. By the 3rd pass, the only thing I could hear from the bedroom was the steel guitar shape of it. A syllable held a little too long, a note dropped that didn't quite resolve, a small descending phrase that landed somewhere it shouldn't have landed. And I want to tell you, I went back into the bedroom and asked her to stop, but I didn't. I stood at the sink with the window open and let her finish. When she was done, she didn't start over. That's the part I keep coming back to. She didn't start over. She didn't loop. She hummed it 3 times. Exactly 3 times. And then she went quiet, like a song fading out, like a track that knew when it was supposed to end. Maggie was asleep by then. Hannah laid her in the bassinet. I heard the small mechanical sound of the bassinet rocker engaging. She'd started it on low, and then the soft squeak of the floorboard near the closet as Hannah moved away from the bed. I heard her footsteps in the hall. I heard her go into the bathroom. I heard the tap. The house went quiet. I closed the kitchen window. I want to tell you what I did next. I sat down at the kitchen table with my phone, and I opened a notes app, and I typed 3 things. I want to read them to you the way I typed them, because the order matters. 1. Hannah felt Maggie cry from the hospital before Maggie cried. 2. The man in the brown jacket is real, and he was there this morning. 3. Hannah is humming the song. I looked at the list. I deleted it. I don't know why I deleted it. I think I told myself I didn't want her to see it if she picked up my phone. I think the truer reason was that writing the 3 things in a list made them look like they were connected, and I wasn't ready for them to be connected yet. I wasn't ready to have a list. I wasn't ready to have a case. I closed the app. I put the phone face down on the table. It was about 9:15 at this point. Hannah came out of the bathroom in her scrubs. She'd been at the hospital all day. She hadn't changed yet. And she said she was going to take a quick shower. She kissed me on the top of the head as she walked past. I heard the bathroom door close. I heard the shower start. The house went quiet again. And then, from the bedroom, in the small mechanical pause between one rock of the bassinet and the next, I heard a sound that was not part of the bassinet. I heard a hum. 3 notes. descending, unresolved. Maggie was 11 weeks old. Maggie did not hum. Maggie could not hum. Maggie made the small, wet vowel sounds that babies make in their sleep, and she made occasional grunting, and she made the cry, but she did not produce a tonal 3-note descending phrase. I stood up. I walked to the bedroom door. I opened it slowly, because if I was wrong, I didn't want to wake her, and if I was right, I didn't want to startle her. Maggie was asleep. Her small fist was curled near her cheek. Her chest was moving in the steady way babies' chests move when they're deep in sleep. The bassinet was rocking on low. The lamp was off. The window above the dresser was open 4 inches. I had watched Hannah leave that room 10 minutes earlier, and I had not heard her open the window further. She had not gone back in. The shower was still running in the bathroom. I could hear it through the wall. I went over to the window. I closed it. I latched it. I stood there for a long time, looking at my daughter sleeping. The thing I want you to understand, the thing I have not been able to stop thinking about, the reason I am telling this story, is that I went over to that window and I closed it. And as I latched the catch, I caught my own reflection in the dark glass. And behind me, in the reflection, the bedroom door was still open the way I'd left it. Beyond the bedroom door was the hallway. Beyond the hallway was the kitchen. In the reflection in the kitchen, the window above the sink, the one I had closed 5 minutes earlier, the one I had latched, was open again. I turned around. I walked out of the bedroom and down the hall and into the kitchen, and the window above the sink was closed and latched, exactly the way I had left it. I'm telling you that without commentary. I want to tell you I went back to the bedroom and checked the dark glass again, and the reflection had corrected itself, and the kitchen window in the reflection was closed. That part I'm sure of. I checked. I made myself check. I want to tell you what I told Hannah when she came out of the shower. I didn't tell her anything. I want to tell you what I did instead. I went to the laundry room. I opened the dryer. Inside the dryer, on top of a pile of folded burp cloths, was a receipt I had not put there. White paper, faded ink. The header said, Shell Route 32. The amount said $14. The timestamp said June 14th, 2024, 3:42 p.m. June 14th last summer, 4 months into Hannah's pregnancy. It wasn't from yesterday. It was from the day she'd stopped. I want to tell you what I did with the receipt, but first I have to tell you about the 4 days between finding it and walking back into the Shell station, because I think those 4 days are the part where I made the choice without admitting I was making it. I didn't tell Hannah about the receipt. I want to be clear about what I did instead. I took it out of the dryer. I held it in my hand for about a minute in the laundry room with the shower still running through the wall. Then I folded it twice, and I put it in my wallet behind my insurance card where Hannah would never look. I closed the dryer. I went back to the kitchen. I poured the glass of water I'd been pretending to drink earlier, and I drank it. I sat at the table. When Hannah came out of the bathroom in her sweatpants, with her hair wet, I asked her if she wanted tea. She said yes. I made her tea. I am going to keep telling you the small lies I told her because they accumulated, and the accumulation matters. The next morning was Friday. I went to work. I did not go to the Shell station. I sat at my desk in the logistics office and stared at a spreadsheet I'd been maintaining for 3 years and didn't enter a single number in it for the first hour. I kept taking the receipt out of my wallet and looking at it. June 14th, 2024, 3:42 p.m. unleaded, 14.00. The paper was slightly stiff, the ink was a little faded but legible, and the header, Shell, Route 32, was printed in the same blue as every Shell receipt I'd ever held. The serial number at the bottom was a long string of digits I copied into a note on my phone, and then sat, looking at until it stopped meaning anything. I told myself a series of explanations. The first explanation was that Hannah had brought the receipt home with her last June and put it somewhere a coat pocket, the glove box, and somehow it had ended up in the dryer 9 months later. This was the explanation I tried hardest to believe. I tried it for about 3 hours. The problem with it was that I couldn't picture the path. I couldn't picture Hannah in June of last year, after a thing that had upset her enough to make her change her route to work for 9 months, taking a receipt for $14 she hadn't even fully pumped, folding it neatly and tucking it into a coat pocket she would later wash. She hadn't pumped $14. She dropped the nozzle. She'd never even gotten the receipt. I called her on my lunch break, not to ask about that, to ask how Maggie was. She said Maggie was fine. She said Maggie had slept until 5 a.m. and was now napping in the swing. She asked me how my morning was. I said fine. She said good. We talked for 2 minutes. I almost asked her about the receipt. I didn't. The second explanation was that one of us had stopped at the Shell station and forgotten that I had at some point in the last 9 months taken the wrong exit by accident the way Hannah did, and pumped $14 on a Friday afternoon and forgotten about it completely. I sat with this one for a long time. The problem with it was that the receipt was dated June 14th, 2024, and on June 14th, 2024, I had been in Atlanta for a regional training, 3 states south, with witnesses. I checked my calendar. I checked the company expense reports. I checked a photo on my phone of a hotel name tag from that week. I had been 600 miles away on June 14th. The third explanation I will not write down, because by the third explanation I had stopped pretending I was working through them in good faith. By the third explanation I was just running through versions of the world that would let me put the receipt in the trash and go home. I didn't put the receipt in the trash. I put it back in my wallet. That was Friday. Saturday, Hannah was off. We took Maggie to a park. We had brunch at a place we used to go before she got pregnant. I held my daughter on my chest in a baby carrier and watched my wife eat eggs and pretend, for both of us, that we were a family on a Saturday morning in March, and not whatever else we were. She was beautiful. I want to write that down and have it on the record, because I don't know how this story is going to end, and I want there to be a sentence somewhere in it where I said my wife was beautiful. She was. That morning at brunch, she was. She laughed at something I said about the waiter, and she put her hand over Maggie's small foot, and she looked at me like nothing was wrong. And I realized she was doing exactly what I was doing. We were both performing for each other. We'd been performing for each other since the night she told me about Birdie. Sunday I cleaned the garage I was supposed to clean on Thursday. Monday I went to work. Monday afternoon I left work early. I told my office I had a doctor's appointment. I told Hannah I had a long meeting and would be late. Both of those were lies. I drove east on Route 32 and at 3:40 in the afternoon, the same time of day I'd pulled in the previous Wednesday, the same time of day Hannah had pulled in 9 months earlier. And yes, I noticed I was matching the time, and no, I am not going to pretend I didn't choose that. I pulled into the Shell station. I went in for water. That's what I told myself I was doing. Going in, buying a bottle of water, walking past the speakers into the mart, looking at the cashier, leaving. I had given myself a short list of things to confirm: that the man in the brown jacket was either there or wasn't, that the song was either playing or wasn't, that the inside of the mart looked normal, that the bell on the door rang for me when I went in. The brown jacket man wasn't at any of the pumps. The song wasn't playing. I want to say that out loud because I had braced for it on the drive over, and the absence of it threw me harder than the presence of it would have. The canopy speakers were producing the small electrical hum that outdoor speakers produce when they're on but not playing anything. No music, no talk radio, just the hum. I parked at pump 4, the same pump I'd used Wednesday, and I didn't pump gas. I got out, I locked the car. I walked toward the mart. The bell on the door rang when I went in. I want you to write that down somewhere in your head because it's going to matter. The bell rang. Ding-clack. against the metal bar at the bottom of the door. Loud. Normal. Exactly the way I remembered it. The inside of the mart was small and clean in the institutional way these places are clean. 2 aisles of snacks. A wall of refrigerated drinks at the back. A coffee station with 3 pots, one labeled decaf in faded tape. A rotating hot dog display under a heat lamp. A magazine rack with a single copy of a fishing magazine I didn't recognize. Behind the counter, a man in a yellow shell polo was looking at his phone. He didn't look up when I came in. I went to the back. I got a bottle of water out of the cooler. I walked to the counter. The man behind the counter was maybe 50, bald, a name tag that said Ray. He had the look of someone who had worked nights for too long and gotten moved to days as a kindness. He scanned my water. The price came up on the little screen, $1.89, and he hit a button on the register and said without looking at me, "That'll be 14 even." I want to tell you I said something. I want to tell you I said what? Or that's not right? Or can you check the price again? I didn't say anything. I stood there with my wallet in my hand and watched the screen, and the price stayed at $1.89, and Ray said 14 even again, slightly more patiently, the way you'd say it to a customer who wasn't paying attention. The screen still said $1.89. Ray's till had the receipt printer spooling. I gave him a 20. He gave me change for 14. I want to be precise about this because it is the moment that is going to follow me for the rest of my life. He gave me a 5 and a 1. The math worked for a $14 transaction. The screen still said $1.89. The receipt came out of the printer with a small zipper sound, the same sound I'd heard at the pump on Wednesday, the same sound that had produced "Sea Attendant," and Ray tore it off and slid it across the counter to me. The receipt said, Shell, Route 32, unleaded, $14. It also said my license plate. I want you to understand that I had not pumped any gas. I want you to understand that the receipt printed an item I had not bought at a station I had not fueled at and printed my license plate at the bottom. A plate I had not given anyone. A plate Ray could not have seen from inside the mart because Pump 4 was on the other side of the canopy, and the angle was wrong. The license plate was correct. NCC-7438. Ray was already looking back at his phone. I picked up the water. I picked up the receipt. I started walking toward the door. That's when he said it. "Have a nice afternoon, Bertie." I stopped. He said it without raising his voice. He said it the way you say "have a nice afternoon" to anyone. The small, bored politeness of a cashier at the end of a transaction, and he didn't look up when he said it. He kept his eyes on his phone. The screen of his phone was reflecting in his glasses. He was just a man at a register. He was just saying goodbye. I turned around. "I want to tell you what I said." I said, "What did you call me?" He looked up. He looked confused. Genuinely. Not performed confusion, not the kind of look someone gives you when they're trying to seem confused. The actual flat blank confusion of a person who hasn't said anything strange. He said, "Have a nice afternoon, sir." I said, "You said Bertie?" He said, "I don't know what you mean." I stood there. He looked at me. After a few seconds, he lifted his phone again and went back to whatever he'd been reading. I was no longer a customer. I was a man standing in a mart looking at a cashier who had moved on. The bell would ring on my way out. The water would be cold against my palm. I would get in my car and drive away. That was the choreography I was supposed to follow. I followed it. The bell rang on the way out. Ding-clack. I walked under the canopy. The speakers hummed. I unlocked the Toyota. I got in. I started the engine. I sat with both hands on the steering wheel. I looked at the receipt. Shell, Route 32, unleaded $14, PLT, NCC-7438. I want to tell you I noticed something else on the receipt right away. I didn't. I was looking at the license plate line. I was reading it over and over. It took me about 30 seconds to look up at the top of the receipt where the timestamp printed. The timestamp said June 14th, 2024, 3:42 p.m., the same date, the same minute, as the receipt I had found in the dryer 4 days earlier. I want to give you a full beat to sit with that. I had 2 receipts now, identical, one that had appeared in my dryer and one that had just been handed to me at the counter. Same date, same time, same amount, same plate. The receipt in my wallet, Hannah's receipt, the one that had appeared on top of the burp cloths, had printed the same license plate as mine, even though it was supposed to be from her car 9 months earlier. I opened my wallet with my hands shaking a little. I took out the receipt from the dryer. I laid it on the passenger seat next to the new one. They were identical. They were not similar. They were not close. They were the same receipt twice, as if a copier had been run over the same paper. The folds were even in the same places, except that I had folded them differently. The dryer one twice, the counter one not at all, and now both of them were creased identically in the way the dryer one had been. I sat there with both receipts on the seat next to me, and I waited for my brain to produce an explanation that would let me drive home. It produced one. It produced a bad one, but it produced one. I told myself that the receipt printer at the Shell station had a recurring glitch, and that the receipt that had ended up in our dryer was just one prior printout of the same glitch, and that my license plate was on it because I had been at the station before, last Wednesday, and the system had cached my plate. The math didn't quite work, but the shape of the math worked. I held on to the shape. I started to put the car in reverse. That's when I saw her, the silver Honda Civic, across the street, parked in the small gravel pull-off in front of the abandoned tax preparer's office, the one that's only open in tax season. The driver's door was open. The woman in the navy windbreaker was standing next to her car with her arms crossed, and she was looking at me. She had been waiting. I don't know how long she'd been waiting. I don't know how she'd known I would come back. I want to tell you I rolled down my window and waved her over, but I didn't. We just looked at each other across Route 32, with 2 lanes of traffic between us, and after about 10 seconds she nodded once. A small nod, the kind you give when something has been confirmed, and she got back in her car. She didn't drive away. She sat there with her hands on the wheel and waited for me. I want to stop and tell you what I should have done. I should have driven home. I should have driven home, gone into our bedroom, sat down next to my wife, given her both receipts, and told her everything I have just told you. I should have apologized for not telling her about the receipt in the dryer 4 days earlier. I should have told her I'd seen the man in the brown jacket on Thursday morning. I should have admitted that I'd been performing too. I should have admitted it before the woman in the windbreaker waited for me a second time. Instead, I checked my mirror, signaled, and pulled out of the Shell station. I crossed Route 32 at the next light. I made a U-turn. I came back up the access road and pulled into the gravel pull-off behind her Civic. She got out of her car when I got out of mine. Her face was the same face it had been in the Wendy's parking lot the previous Wednesday. The face of someone who had already accepted what was about to happen. She said, "Show me what you got." I held out the new receipt. She looked at it without touching it. She took maybe 2 seconds. Then she said, "Show me the other one." I want you to understand that I had not told her there was another one. I had told her in the Wendy's parking lot only that my wife had stopped at the station while she was pregnant. I had not mentioned the dryer. I had not mentioned the receipt. I had not told her there was anything besides the song. She knew there was another one. I reached into my wallet and took out the dryer receipt. I held them up next to each other so she could see them. She looked at them. She nodded slowly, the way you nod when something you've been afraid of is confirmed. She said, "Get in your car. Follow me. We can't talk here." I asked her where we were going. She said, "Somewhere with cameras, so I have a witness too." I want to pause on that because I didn't pause on it at the time. I should have, so I have a witness too, meaning she'd already been a witness before and she'd survived being a witness once, and she was not going to do it alone again. She got in her Civic. I got in the Toyota. Before I put it in drive, I looked back across the street at the Shell station one more time. Ray was standing in the doorway of the mart. He had stepped outside. He was holding the door open with one foot. He was looking directly at me across 2 lanes of traffic, across the gravel pull-off, across whatever distance we were supposed to keep from each other, and he was smiling. He raised one hand in a small, polite wave. The bell on the door behind him did not ring as he stood there with the door wedged open against it. I want you to remember the bell that rang when I went in, the bell that rang when I came out, the bell that didn't ring with the door pinned against the bar. The Honda Civic pulled out onto Route 32. I followed her. She drove west on Route 32 past the Wendy's, where we talked the previous Wednesday, past the elementary school sign, past the auto parts store, where I'd held Maggie in the parking lot. She kept her speed exactly at the limit. She used her turn signal at every intersection, even when there was nobody behind her. I followed at 3 or 4 car lengths and watched her hands on the steering wheel through the rear window. Both hands, 10 and 2, exactly the way she'd had them in the Wendy's lot. She turned into the parking lot of a Sheetz, about 6 miles up. I want to explain the choice. Sheetz is a chain, the kind of place that has 8 cameras in the lot, 4 on the canopy, 2 at every door, and a manager on duty 24 hours. She'd picked the most surveilled gas station on Route 32 to talk about the least surveilled one. I understood that as soon as I saw the building, whatever was happening at the Shell, whatever was reaching into our house, reaching into Hannah's pregnancy, reaching into a woman's son who was now 8 years old. She didn't believe it could reach into a place that was being filmed. I want to come back to whether she was right about that. She parked at the far end of the lot, near a dumpster, but in clear view of 2 cameras on the building's east wall. She got out. She waited for me to park next to her. She didn't get back in her car. She leaned against the hood of the Civic with her arms crossed. And when I walked up, she looked at me and said, "We're going to do this fast. I have to pick up my son at 4:30. I asked her if I could ask her name. She said Marissa. She didn't give me a last name. She didn't ask for mine. I told her my first name anyway, because it felt rude not to, and she nodded the way she'd nodded at me across Route 32. Small, contained, the nod of a person ticking a box. She said, "Tell me what happened in the mart." I told her. I told her about Ray, about the water, about the screen showing $1.89, and Ray saying 14 even. I told her about my license plate on the receipt. I told her Ray had said Birdie on my way out, and that when I'd asked about it, he'd looked at me like he genuinely hadn't said it. I told her about the dryer receipt from 4 days earlier, and that the 2 receipts were identical, and that the dates and times matched. She listened without interrupting. She let me finish. Then she said, "What was your wife's nickname?" I said, "Birdie. Her grandmother called her Birdie when she was little." Marissa nodded once. She unfolded her arms and put her hands in the pockets of her windbreaker and looked at the cameras on the east wall of the Sheetz. And then she looked back at me and said, "My grandmother called me Mouse." I didn't say anything. She said, "When I stopped at that station in 2016, I was about 5 months along. There was a man at the next pump in a brown jacket. I never saw his face. He said, 'How's the baby?' Mouse," without looking up from his pump. I'd never told anyone in this state that nickname. My grandmother was from Veracruz. She'd been dead for 14 years by then. The only people on this side of the country who would have known it were my mother, who died the year before, and my older sister who lived in Phoenix. Nobody else. Not my husband, not my friends. The man at Pump 3 said it like he'd heard it 100 times. I asked her if the song was playing. She said, yes, the same song. Steel guitar, a man's voice, slow. There was a chorus, and the second time it played, I caught the words, "The Long Way Home." I remember hearing it and feeling like I'd been hearing it for years already, like it had been on in the background of my whole life. And I just never bothered to turn the volume up. You know that feeling? I said I did. I dropped the nozzle, she said. I got in the car, I drove away. I called my husband from the parking lot of a McDonald's. I told him a man at the gas station had called me by a name he shouldn't have known, and I made him promise we wouldn't go back to that station. He promised. He's a reasonable person. He said, yeah, of course, Marissa, that's creepy. We won't go back. He thought I was overreacting. I let him think that. I didn't tell him about the song because I didn't want him to laugh. She looked at me. Has your wife told her husband about the song? I said, I am her husband. She smiled, very small, very tired. I meant a different question. I meant, has she told anyone? I said, she told me 3 days ago. Marissa nodded. 3 days ago, and you went back to the station within 72 hours. I said, yes. She said, we all do that. I went back too. I went back about a month after my son was born. I told my husband I needed milk. I drove to that station instead of the Wegmans, and I sat in the parking lot for 15 minutes and didn't get out of the car. I didn't pump gas. I didn't go inside. I just sat. The song was playing. I cried. I drove home. She paused. It's a kind of pull, she said. I don't know what else to call it. After it happens, you spend the rest of the pregnancy not thinking about it because you can't afford to think about it. And then the baby comes, and you have something more important than yourself to think about for a while, and that helps. And then one day, 6 weeks, 8 weeks later, you find yourself driving toward it without remembering deciding to, like the route is already in your hands. I told her I'd driven past it on Thursday morning with my daughter in the back seat. She closed her eyes for a second. She said, how old? I said, 11 weeks. She said, did you stop? I said, no. She said, did your wife feel it? I want to write down exactly what I said next, because it's the moment I gave her something I hadn't given anyone else, including Hannah. I said she texted me that the baby had woken up screaming. The text came in 30 seconds before the baby actually started crying. Marissa opened her eyes. She said, mine did that too, my husband, in 2016, when I drove past the station on the way home from the McDonald's. He was at the house with his mother. His mother was visiting. He texted me from inside the house and asked if I was okay. He said he'd had a feeling. He said it like a joke. He didn't know I'd been at the station. He thought I was at the Wegmans. She tilted her head. He doesn't know to this day. He thinks I had a panic attack at a Shell station 9 years ago, and we agreed not to go back. He doesn't know about the Pump 3 man. He doesn't know about the song. He doesn't know that on the day my son turned 3, I came out into the kitchen, and he was in his high chair, humming something, and I recognized it before I'd consciously placed it, and I had to leave the room and throw up in the bathroom. I didn't say anything for a while. She let me not say anything. She watched the cameras on the wall of the sheets. The traffic on Route 32 went past. A delivery truck pulled into the lot and parked at the diesel pump on the far side. The driver got out and stretched. Marissa watched him too. I think she was watching everyone. I asked her finally, why did you come back today? You followed me on Wednesday, but today you were waiting for me. You knew I was coming. She turned to me. She said, I come back every Wednesday. I come back every Wednesday at 3:40 in the afternoon, because that's when I stopped there in 2016. I sit in the gravel pull-off across the street. I don't get out of the car. I watch. I do this so I'll know if anyone else is coming. I've been doing it for about 3 years. I asked her why she'd started. Because of the boy, she said. Not my son, another boy. I was at the station, sitting in the pull-off about 3 years ago, and a young couple pulled in, and the woman was visibly pregnant, maybe 7, 8 months. They got gas. I sat there and watched them. The Pump 3 man wasn't at the pumps that day, but the song was on the speakers. I could hear it through my open window. The woman went inside the mart. She came back out. She got in the car. They drove away. I told myself it was nothing. I got home, I cried for 2 hours. My husband asked what was wrong. I lied. The next Wednesday I went back. The Wednesday after that I went back. I've been going back ever since because I told myself that if I saw a pregnant woman go in there again, I was going to stop her. I was going to walk over to her car and warn her. She paused. I never did, she said. I saw 3 pregnant women at that station in 3 years. I never got out of my car. I told myself each time that I didn't have proof. I told myself she'd think I was crazy. I told myself maybe nothing was happening to that woman. Maybe it had only happened to me. I drove home. I cried. I went back the next Wednesday. She looked at me. Last Wednesday, I saw a man come out of the mart who looked like he didn't know what had just happened to him. I followed him. I asked him a question. I'm here today because I owed it to myself to find out if I'd been right. I asked her if she'd been right. She said, you tell me, did your wife have a daughter? I said, yes. She said, don't bring her here. Don't ever bring her here. I said I knew. She told me that the previous Wednesday. Marissa shook her head. I told you that before I knew about the daughter. I told you that as a guess. Now I'm telling it to you as a fact. Whatever this is, it picks. It picks who it talks to. It picked your wife twice, in 2011 and last June. And I think that means it's been picking her for a long time. Maybe since she was small. Maybe before she was your wife. And now it's going to pick your daughter because that's what it does. It moves down the line. I asked her how she knew that. She said, because of my son. I waited. She said, I'm not going to tell you what my son does. I'm not going to tell you what I've heard him say. Not because I don't trust you. Because if I tell you, it'll happen sooner. I'm telling you that it happens. I'm telling you that the thing at that station knows the children. Don't ask me how. I don't know how. But it does. And the only thing I have figured out, the only thing in 9 years, is that the song is the channel. The song is how it gets to them. If your wife heard the song while she was pregnant, the baby heard it too. If the baby heard it, it knows the baby. And if it knows the baby, you have to assume the baby has been known since before she was born. I want to tell you what I felt when she said that, but I don't have the words for it. I want to tell you what came out of my mouth, but nothing came out for a while. I stood there in the parking lot of a Sheetz on Route 32 and looked at a woman I had not known existed 2 weeks earlier. And I thought about my 11-week-old daughter humming 3 notes in a bassinet with the window open 4 inches. I asked her finally what I should do. She said, don't go back. Not for any reason. Not to look. Not for water. Not to drive past. Get rid of the receipts. Burn them. Don't keep them. Don't take pictures of them. Don't show them to your wife. Or show them to your wife and burn them together. Whatever. But get rid of them today. I told her I'd already taken pictures. She closed her eyes again. She said, delete them, empty the trash, empty the cloud. I told her I would. She said, and look up the song. I said, what? Look up the song. She said, go home tonight when your wife and your daughter are asleep and search for the song. Find the lyric, The Long Way Home, and a steel guitar and a man's voice. There aren't that many. There's only one, actually. Look at the year it was recorded. Look at when the singer died. Then look at when the Shell station on Route 32 was built. Look at the county property records. They're online. You can find them in 20 minutes. And then think about what you saw. I asked her what she meant. She said, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to let you find it yourself. Because if I tell you, you'll think I'm crazy. If you find it, you'll know. She started to walk back to her car. I said her name. I said, Marissa. She stopped. I said, what did you find? She turned around. She looked at me. The cameras on the east wall of the Sheetz were watching us. The cars on Route 32 were going by behind her. The light was the kind of late afternoon light that comes in low across a parking lot and makes everything look like it's about to be evening. She said, I found out the song shouldn't exist. I found out the station shouldn't have been able to play it. And I found out that I'm not the first person who's figured that out, and I'm not going to be the last. There's a forum, you'll find it if you look. Don't post on it, just read it, and after you read it, you'll have to decide whether you want to know more or whether you want to stop. I asked her what she decided. She said, I decided to stop. And then I got in the car 9 years later and started watching the pull-off every Wednesday at 3:40. So I don't know what stopping means. I don't think there's a version of stopping that works. I think there's a version where you slow it down and you keep your daughter alive until she's old enough to know not to go back. And you teach her the way my mother taught me. And then she has a daughter, and the daughter takes the long way home for 9 months, and on and on. She got into her Civic. She rolled down her window. She said, I'm going to do something now I haven't done in 9 years. I'm going to give you my phone number. If you see the man in the brown jacket again, not at the station, anywhere else, you call me. If your daughter starts humming and your wife doesn't, you call me. If anything ends up in your house that you didn't put there, you call me. Don't text. Call. I won't pick up the first time. Try again. She gave me her number. I put it in my phone. I named the contact M. She put the Civic in reverse. I want to tell you what happened next, because it's the part I keep getting wrong when I try to tell it back to myself, and I want to get it right while I still remember. A truck came down the access road behind the sheets. A small box truck. White. No signage. The kind you rent from a U-Haul. It went past us slowly, slower than the speed limit on a side access road. The driver was a man in a brown work jacket. I saw the jacket. I saw the side of his face. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Marissa. He drove past at maybe 10 miles an hour and turned onto Route 32 and went east. Marissa had her window down to give me her number. The truck went past while she was telling me to call instead of text. She didn't stop talking. She didn't see him. I was looking at her. She was looking at me. The truck was on the other side of her car. I caught it in my peripheral vision and turned my head and saw it just as the back end was passing, and I saw the brown sleeve at the driver's window, and I saw the side of a jaw under a brown cap, and then the truck was gone. She finished her sentence. Try again. Then she rolled up her window, and she rolled it slowly, the way you roll a window up when you're being careful. And she was already pulling out of the space when I started to say something. I said her name. She didn't hear me, and the window was up. She lifted one hand off the wheel in a small wave, the same nod hand wave she'd given me across Route 32, and she pulled out of the lot. She turned right onto the access road, the same direction the truck had gone. I want to tell you I ran after her. I didn't. I stood in the lot of a Sheets and watched her drive in the direction the truck had just gone, and I told myself she would notice it. She'd notice it within a quarter mile. She'd see the brown sleeve, she'd recognize the jaw. She'd turn around. She'd come back. She didn't come back. I waited about 10 minutes. I sat in the Toyota. I called the number she'd given me. It rang 4 times and went to a voicemail that just played the carrier's default greeting. A robot voice, reading her phone number back. No name. I didn't leave a message. I called again. Same thing. I tried a 3rd time, same. I drove home. I want to tell you about the drive home, but there's nothing to tell about the drive home except that I took the detour without thinking about it. 2 left turns through the neighborhood, past the blue fire hydrant on Birchcrest and Pinehurst, past the yellow house with the basketball hoop, onto Route 32, a mile past the station, the way Hannah had drawn it on the back of an envelope 9 months ago. When I pulled into our driveway, Hannah was on the porch, with Maggie in her arms. She was waiting. She didn't wave, she didn't smile. She watched me park, and she watched me get out of the car, and she watched me walk up the porch steps. She had Maggie tucked against her shoulder, the small blanket draped over her back the way Hannah always draped it, and Maggie was awake. Maggie was looking at me too. I want to tell you that what Hannah said when I came up the steps was something normal. How was work? Did you stop for groceries? Did you remember the wipes? She didn't say any of those things. She held the door open for me with her free hand, and as I walked past her into the house, she said in a voice that was very calm and very level, "Where did you go today?" I said, "I had a meeting." She said, "Don't." I stopped in the entryway. I turned around. She had closed the door behind us. She had Maggie on her shoulder. Maggie's small hand was clutching the collar of Hannah's shirt. Hannah was looking at me with the same face she'd had at 1 a.m. when she told me about Bertie. The face of a person who had decided finally to say something she had been avoiding. She said, "I know where you went." I asked her how she knew. She said, "Because I heard the song again at 3:41. I was rocking Maggie. The kitchen window was open. The song was outside. It only played for about 10 seconds. I closed the window. I sat down on the floor with her, and I knew. I knew exactly where you were. I was going to call you. I didn't. I waited." She looked down at our daughter. She heard it too, she said. She stopped fussing. She listened. For the whole 10 seconds, she listened. And when it stopped, she started humming. She looked back up at me. "I need you to tell me what you've been doing. I want to tell you what I told her. I'll tell you next chapter." I told her. I want to be clear that I told her everything, because I have spent most of the days since wishing I could remember telling her better. I sat down at the kitchen table with my wife and our daughter, and I told her about the receipt in the dryer. I told her I had not told her about it for 4 days. I told her I had gone back to the Shell station at 3:40 in the afternoon. I told her about Ray. I told her about the $14 charge on a bottle of water. I told her about my license plate on the receipt. I told her about Marisa in the parking lot of the Sheets, and about Marissa's son, and about the man in the brown jacket who had driven past in a small white box truck while Marissa hadn't been looking. I gave her the receipts. I put both of them on the table between us, the drier one, faded a little at the edges, the new one still crisp from the printer. I laid them next to each other so she could see they were identical. She didn't pick them up. She looked at them for a long time. Maggie was asleep on her shoulder by then. She didn't shift her weight. She didn't reach across the table. She just looked at the 2 pieces of paper and let them be on the table. And after about a minute, she said, "You should have told me Thursday." I said I knew. She said, "You took her past it. With the windows up, with me at the hospital, you took her past it." I said I knew. She didn't yell. I want to say that because it would have been easier if she'd yelled. Hannah doesn't yell. She does something else, which is that she goes very, very still and lets the air around her get cold. And then she says one true sentence, and the true sentence is what you have to live with. She said, "I don't trust you to take her anywhere alone again. Not until this is over." I said, "Okay." She said, "And I don't trust you to decide what to look up about this on your own. So we're going to do it together. Tonight, after she goes down, you're going to sit at this table with me and we're going to find the song." I said, "Okay." We didn't talk much for the rest of the afternoon. She made dinner. I held Maggie. We ate. We bathed Maggie together in the small plastic tub on the kitchen counter. Hannah dipped her hand in the water before lowering Maggie in the way she always did to test the temperature, and Maggie made a small, contented sound at the warmth. And for about a minute, the 3 of us were a family in a kitchen on a Monday evening, and the receipts were still on the table behind us. And I let myself look at my wife's hands and my daughter's small, wet hair and feel like the world was correctly ordered. It wasn't. But for a minute, I let myself feel it. We put Maggie down at 8:30. Hannah did the rocking. I did the dishes. We didn't speak. At 9, we sat down at the kitchen table together, and Hannah opened my laptop and turned it so we were both looking at the screen. She said, "What was the lyric?" I said, "The Long Way Home." She typed it into the search bar. She typed "The Long Way Home country song, steel guitar." She hit enter. The first few results were what you'd expect. A James Taylor song, a Norah Jones song, a bluegrass cover of something else. A 2014 country single by an artist I'd never heard of. None of them were ours. The James Taylor was wrong tempo. The Norah Jones was wrong genre. We listened to the first few seconds of each. None of them were the song. Hannah scrolled. On the third page of results, there was a thread on a small archival country music forum. The thread title was Unidentified Country Single, Late 60s, Long Way Home, Refrain. Anyone? It had been started in 2009. The original poster was someone with a username I won't repeat, because I don't want to make their handle searchable. They had described the song in detail. Slow, steel guitar that holds the notes too long, a man's voice that sounded like he'd been crying, a chorus, the long way home, and a line in the second verse. And the road don't end where you think it ends, that the original poster said had stayed in their head for 40 years. Below the original post, there were 43 replies, dating from 2009 to 2022. Most of them were people guessing. Could be Don Gibson, could be Ferlin Husky, could be a B-side off a Charlie Walker single. The original poster had checked all of those. None matched. The 17th reply from 2014 was different. It was from someone with a different handle. They wrote, I think you're looking for Earl Vance Hadley, The Long Way Home, 1967 private pressing, never released commercially. Hadley was a black country musician out of West Tennessee. About 200 copies were pressed. He died in March 1968 in a car accident on US 65 before the record could be promoted. I have a copy. I won't upload it. If you want to hear it, message me. Hannah stopped scrolling. I read the reply twice. She read it 3 times. Neither of us said anything for a while. She said, click his profile. I clicked the username. The profile was inactive. Last login, April 2017. There were 3 posts attached to the account. All of them on this same thread. All of them from 2014. The third one, dated about a month after the first, said, to everyone messaging me, I am not going to share the recording. Please stop asking. I'm sorry. That was the last anyone had heard from him. We went back to the original thread. We read the rest of it. There were 6 other people in replies between 2014 and 2022 who had said some version of, I heard this song too. I was at a gas station / I was driving / I was in my grandmother's house when I was a child, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. None of them had specified the location. None of them had said Route 32. They had said somewhere in the Carolinas, somewhere in eastern Tennessee, somewhere in Virginia. The locations were spread across maybe 400 miles of the southeast. The most recent reply was from December 2022. The user said, I drove out of my way last weekend to find a station where my mother said she'd heard it once when she was pregnant with my brother. I sat in the lot for 20 minutes. The speakers played other things. Then for about 40 seconds, between 2 other songs, I heard it. I'm writing this from my car. I am not going to write where I am. Hannah closed the thread. She said, search his name. I typed Earl Vance Hadley into the search bar. There were 3 results. The first was a brief obituary, scanned from a 1968 issue of a Tennessee weekly newspaper, hosted on a county genealogy site. It said Earl Vance Hadley, age 29, of Brownsville, Tennessee, had died on March 14th, 1968, in a single vehicle accident on US 65 outside Memphis. He was survived by his wife, Adela, and a daughter, age 4. The obituary noted that Hadley had been a recording artist with a small local following. The second was a 1-paragraph entry on a hobbyist website devoted to obscure Southern musicians of the 1960s. It said Hadley had recorded a single 45, The Long Way Home / I'll See You at the Crossroads, in late 1967, pressed 200 copies through a small Memphis label that went out of business in 1969, and was killed before the record received any radio play. The entry said the recording was of historical interest but has never been digitized. The third was the photograph. It was on the same hobbyist site, a black and white photograph from the recording session in 1967. The caption said, Earl Vance Hadley at session, October 1967, Memphis. Hadley was seated on a stool with a guitar across his knees. He was a young black man in a checkered shirt, a button-up. The pattern was small, dark, and light squares, and he was looking down at the guitar with the small, private smile of someone who was about to play. A microphone was in front of him. A producer or engineer was visible in the corner of the frame, half cropped out. On the wall behind Hadley was a calendar. The calendar was open to October 1967. I want to be precise about what the calendar showed, because I sat at the kitchen table with my wife on a Monday night, and I looked at this photograph on a small laptop screen, and I want to be precise. The calendar was the kind of cheap promotional calendar a business might give a customer. The top half was a black and white illustration. It was a photograph of a yellow gas station, the canopy, the pumps, the small mart with the bell on the door. The Shell logo was visible on a sign at the entrance. Below the photograph, in block letters, were the words, Shell, Route 32, serving this community since 1972. I want you to read that sentence again. The calendar in the photograph was open to October 1967. It was hanging on the wall of a Memphis recording studio at the session where Earl Vance Hadley recorded the song. Hadley died in March of 1968. The Shell station on Route 32, the station where my wife had stopped while pregnant in 2024, the station where Marissa had stopped while pregnant in 2016, was advertising itself as having served the community since 1972, 5 years after the photograph was taken, 4 years after Hadley was dead. A calendar in 1967 cannot have advertised a station that didn't exist for another 5 years. I closed the laptop. I want to tell you what I felt. I felt the small, hot feeling at the base of my throat that you feel when you've just touched something that didn't burn but should have. I felt the distance between myself and my wife shrink a little, and then a little more, until our knees were touching under the table and neither of us had moved them on purpose. I felt Maggie's monitor on the counter make the small electronic sound it makes when she shifts in her sleep, and I felt my body lean toward the sound the way it always leans. Before I'd finished noticing, Hannah opened the laptop again. She said, I need to look at it one more time. She did. We did. The calendar was still there. The words were still there. Shell, Route 32, serving this community since 1972. The photograph was the same photograph. We zoomed in. We looked at the resolution. The text was crisp. It wasn't a watermark. It wasn't a fan edit. The hobbyist site had hosted this photograph since 2003, according to the upload date on the page, and the photograph had clearly been scanned from an older print, with the small dust spots and creases that scanned old photographs have. Hannah said, pull up the county property records. I did. It took about 10 minutes. I found the property record for the Shell station. The original parcel had been purchased in November 1971. The first structure on the parcel, a service station, had been built in 1972. The current canopy and mart had been remodeled in 2003. The property had changed hands twice. The most recent transfer in 2014 was to a holding company I'd never heard of, registered in Delaware. There had been nothing on the parcel before 1971. The land had been agricultural, a small piece of pine forest that abutted a tobacco lot, and the deed history showed it had been owned by a single family since 1923. There had not been a Shell station on Route 32 in 1967. There had not been any station on Route 32 in 1967. Hannah looked at me. I looked at her. She said, call the corporate line. I said, what? Call Shell, she said. Call their customer service line. Ask them about the music. Ask them how the outdoor speakers work. I want to hear what they say. It was 9:48 at night. I told her that. She said, they have a 24-hour line. Call it. I called. I put it on speaker. The phone rang twice, and a recorded voice answered with the standard menu. For fuel inquiries, press 1. For credit card issues, press 2. When I navigated through to a customer service representative, the hold music was instrumental. I want to flag that. The hold music was a generic instrumental. I had been bracing the entire time I was on hold for the steel guitar. It didn't come. A man picked up after about 3 minutes. He had a slight Texas accent. His name was Devin. He was perfectly polite. I told him I had a question about the music played through the outdoor canopy speakers at Shell stations. I gave him the address of the station on Route 32. I asked him, as casually as I could, whether the music was centrally controlled by Shell corporate or whether individual franchises chose their own playlists. Devin said, "Sir, that's a great question. The outdoor music systems at branded Shell locations are part of our corporate audio program. They run on a centralized feed that's managed out of our marketing office. Individual stations don't have the ability to play their own audio through those speakers." I asked him when those speakers had been installed. He said he'd have to check, but the standard outdoor canopy audio package had been rolled out across the network in 2009. He could confirm specific install dates if I had a service complaint, but the answer for that station was almost certainly 2009. I asked him whether the centralized feed ever played country music. He laughed a little. He said, "Honestly, sir, the playlist is real bland. It's all pop, soft rock, the occasional acoustic thing. Corporate avoids country and avoids religious music. We don't want to alienate anyone at the pump." I asked him whether it was possible, even theoretically, that an old, obscure recording could end up on the outdoor speakers at a single station. Whether someone could splice in a recording, whether a glitch could cause it. He paused for a few seconds. He said, "Sir, the system isn't really set up that way. The speakers receive the feed over a satellite uplink. There's no local input. A station manager couldn't plug a CD into the canopy speakers if he wanted to. It just doesn't work like that." I thanked him. I hung up. Hannah and I sat at the kitchen table. The receipts were still on the table between us. The laptop was still open. The photograph of Earl Vance Hadley was still on the screen. The calendar visible on the wall behind him. The words, Shell, Route 32. Serving this community since 1972 still legible above his head. Hannah said, "There's no version of this where I'm wrong about the song." I said, "No." She said, "There's no version of this where the song was on the speakers." I said, "No." She said, "And if it wasn't on the speakers, it was somewhere else." I said, "I don't know what that means." She looked at me. Her eyes were dry. She hadn't been crying. She wasn't going to. She said, "It means it wasn't coming from the station. It was coming from us. From me, or from her, or from the air around us. The station is just where it gets loud enough to hear." I want to tell you that I argued with her. I want to tell you that I had a counter-argument, that I produced a more reassuring theory, that I told her she was tired and that we should sleep on it. I didn't. I sat at the table, and I let what she'd said be true, because it was the only thing on the table that explained both the song existing and the calendar existing, and the receipt being printed with my plate on it. The station wasn't the source. The station was the place where the source got loud. Hannah closed the laptop. She said, "I'm going to check on Maggie." She got up. She walked down the hall. I sat at the table and listened to her go. I heard her open the bedroom door. I heard the small hush of the bassinet rocker. I heard her say something quietly, too quietly to make out. And then I heard her stop. She was quiet for a long time. I want you to understand that Hannah is a calm person. Hannah does not panic. Hannah, when she finds a problem, says the problem out loud in plain language, and then begins to address it. That's the kind of person she is. So when I say she was quiet for a long time in our daughter's room, I want you to understand that I waited at the table for almost 2 minutes for her to come back and tell me what she'd seen, and she didn't come back. I got up. I walked down the hall. I want to describe this carefully because it's the moment I keep replaying. The hallway light was on. The bedroom door was open. The bassinet was at the foot of our bed, where it had been every night for 11 weeks. The bassinet rocker was running on low, the small mechanical tick-tick-tick of the rocker arm catching at the bottom of each cycle. The lamp on the nightstand was off. Light from the hallway came in across the floor in a long, pale wedge. Hannah was standing next to the bassinet. She was not moving. Maggie was asleep in the bassinet. Her small chest was rising and falling. Her fist was curled near her cheek. The blanket Hannah had laid over her at 8:30 was still tucked under her arms. The window above the dresser was closed and latched. I want you to know that because it matters. The window was closed. The window was latched. I had latched it myself on Thursday night, and we had not opened it since. I came into the room. I came up next to Hannah. I asked her what was wrong. She didn't answer right away. She looked at me. Her eyes were very still. She put her finger to her lips. She pointed at Maggie. I leaned over the bassinet. Maggie was asleep. Her breathing was steady. There was nothing wrong. Then I heard it. It was very faint. It was so faint that for the first few seconds I thought I was making it up. It was a small hum. 3 notes, descending, unresolved. The same 3 notes Hannah had hummed to her on Thursday night. The same 3 notes that had come from the bassinet on Thursday night when I'd thought I was hearing Maggie. Maggie was not humming. Maggie's mouth was closed. The humming was coming from the bassinet, but it was not coming from her. Hannah leaned down very slowly. She put her ear close to the mattress. She held it there for about 10 seconds. Then she straightened up. Her face was the face of a person who has already decided that they are not going to scream, and who is going to handle the next several minutes, one breath at a time. She lifted Maggie out of the bassinet. Maggie didn't wake up. Hannah held her against her shoulder. Hannah backed away from the bassinet. Slowly, the way you back away from something you don't want to startle, until she was at the bedroom door. She said, "Get the receipts, get the laptop, get the diaper bag. We're going to my sister's tonight." I said, "What about the bassinet?" She said, "Leave it." I went. I got the receipts off the kitchen table. I got the laptop. I got the diaper bag from the hook by the door. I got Maggie's small coat off the back of the kitchen chair. I came back. Hannah was standing in the entryway with our daughter on her shoulder. She was wearing her coat already. She said, "Don't close the bedroom door." I asked her why. She said, "Because I want to know if it's still humming when we leave. I want to be able to hear it from the hallway. And if it stops when we open the front door, I want to know that it stopped." I left the bedroom door open. We walked to the front door together. Hannah opened it. We listened. The humming from the open bedroom down the hall kept going. 3 notes. Down. Unresolved. 3 notes. Down. Unresolved. It was still going as we stepped out onto the porch. It was still going as Hannah carried Maggie down the steps. It was still going as I closed and locked the front door, with the bedroom door behind it still open, with the bassinet still rocking on low, with the window above the dresser closed and latched, and with whatever was in the bassinet not yet ready to stop. We got in Hannah's car. She drove. I held Maggie in the back seat with my hand on her chest, feeling her breathe. I am writing this from my sister-in-law's house. It is 1 a.m. Hannah is asleep on the couch with Maggie on her chest. The bassinet is still in our bedroom 3 miles away, in a house I don't intend to go back into until morning. I want to tell you the story is over. It isn't. I want to tell you that we left the house and the song stayed behind in the bassinet, and we will go back tomorrow with the contractor and we will throw the bassinet away. We will, and it won't matter. Because at 12:58 in the morning, 4 minutes before I started writing this, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from a number I had saved earlier today as M. The text said, "He was at my door tonight, the man in the brown jacket. He knocked. My husband answered. He didn't know who he was. He let him in. I don't know what to do." The next text said, "He asked about you. I have not replied yet. I am going to. I want to tell you what I texted back. I want to be honest that I sat with my phone in my hand on my sister-in-law's couch for almost 12 minutes before I answered her, because I did not know what to say to a woman I had met once in a Sheetz parking lot who had just told me a man I had also seen once through a windshield had walked into her house while her husband held the door open. What I finally typed was, "Are you safe right now?" She replied within 10 seconds, "Yes." He left. He was here for about 3 minutes. I typed, "What did he say?" She replied, "I'll tell you in the morning. Don't call." He said, "Don't call." That was at 1:11 in the morning. I sat with the phone face down on my chest for a long time after that. My sister-in-law's couch is a brown leather sectional in a small living room with a Christmas photo wall that hasn't been updated since 2021. The lamp by the door was on. Hannah was asleep with Maggie on her chest in the recliner across from me. Maggie was making the small sleep sounds 11-week-olds make. Hannah's breathing had slowed about an hour earlier in the way it slows when she's actually asleep and not just resting her eyes. I didn't sleep. I want to talk about the rest of that week because I am going to end this part of the story soon, and I want you to understand what we did and what we didn't do and what is and isn't resolved. We slept at my sister-in-law's for 3 nights. On the morning after, Tuesday, I called a contractor I'd used to put in a fence 2 years earlier. I asked him if he did same-day work. He said he could be at our house by 10. I drove over. I met him in the driveway. I had not been back inside since we'd left the previous night. The bedroom door was still open the way I'd left it. I want you to know that. I checked from the hallway before I went in. I stood at the threshold and I listened, and there was no humming, and the bassinet was still rocking on low because the battery hadn't run out. The window above the dresser was open again. I want to tell you I expected that. I didn't. I had assumed the latch was the latch and would hold. I had told myself on the drive over that we'd come back and the window would be closed and the bassinet would be still and we'd feel a little foolish. That isn't what we found. The window was open 4 inches. The latch was disengaged. There was no draft because there was no wind that morning and the curtains weren't moving and nothing in the room had been disturbed. The bassinet was empty, the way we'd left it. The contractor came in. I had him remove the bassinet. We took it out to the driveway together. I told him I wanted it gone, not donated, not put in storage, gone, and he said he could take it to the dump on his next run. I gave him $40 extra and watched him load it into the back of his pickup. He didn't ask questions. I think he could tell from my face that questions weren't going to get him a useful answer. I had him replace the lock on the window above the dresser. I had him replace the lock on the kitchen window above the sink. I had him install motion sensors on both sides of the house and a small camera on the back deck. I told him I'd been seeing someone in the yard at night. He nodded. He said he had a brother-in-law who'd had the same problem. He didn't ask me to describe the someone. He was done by 2 in the afternoon. I paid him. He left. I sat in our kitchen alone for a while after he left. The receipts were in my jacket pocket. The laptop was on the table where Hannah and I had left it the night before. I opened it. I looked at the photograph of Earl Vance Hadley one more time because I wanted to see if I could find something I'd missed. And I sat there for about 20 minutes, scrolling around the edges of the image, looking at the producer in the corner, looking at Hadley's hands on the guitar, looking at the calendar. The calendar had changed. I want to be careful about how I say this. I am not saying the photograph was different. I am saying that what I noticed when I looked at it the second time was different. The calendar was still open to October 1967. The photograph at the top was still of the Shell station on Route 32. The caption was still Shell, Route 32, serving this community since 1972. But there was a notation on one of the dates. I had not noticed it the night before. Hannah had not noticed it. We had been looking at the caption. We had not been looking at the dates on the calendar grid below the photograph. Someone in 1967, in the studio where Earl Vance Hadley recorded his only single, had circled October 24th with a black ballpoint pen. October 24th. My daughter was born on November 19th, 2024, but Hannah's due date had been November 14th, Hannah's last menstrual period. The date her OB had used to calculate the pregnancy timeline had been February 7th, 2024. The date of conception, as best the OB could estimate, had been February 21st. None of these dates were October 24th, but October 24th, 2024 was the date Hannah had stopped at the Shell station while pregnant. I want to give you a beat to sit with that. I had been telling you all along that she'd stopped in October 4 months pregnant, but I had been keeping the specific date a little soft because I have been telling the story from my own memory, and I wasn't sure of the date until I checked her credit card statement on Saturday morning. The transaction at the Shell station, a $14 charge that we had both forgotten about until the receipt appeared in our dryer, had been on October 24th, 2024. A photograph taken in October 1967 had a calendar in the background with October 24th circled. I closed the laptop. I want to tell you I called Hannah and told her about the circle. I didn't. I want to tell you I called Marissa. I didn't. I sat in our kitchen with the laptop closed in front of me, and I made a decision that I want to put on the record now because I don't think it was the right decision, and I want to be honest about it. I decided not to look at the photograph again. I decided I was not going to zoom in on the calendar a third time. I decided I was not going to look at the other dates. I was not going to see if any other dates were circled. I was not going to find out if November 19th was circled or if any future dates were circled, because I had already understood that there was no version of looking at the calendar that left me better off than not looking at it. The calendar was old. The calendar predated my wife. The calendar predated my marriage. If something on it had circled my daughter's birthday in 1967, I was not going to be the one who confirmed it. I closed the laptop. I unplugged it. I put it in the closet under the stairs, and I closed the closet door. I drove back to my sister-in-law's. Hannah and Maggie were on the couch. Hannah was nursing. I sat down across from her. I told her about the bassinet. I told her about the window. I told her about the new locks. I did not tell her about the circle on October 24th. She listened. When I was done, she nodded once. She said, "We're going home tomorrow." I asked her if she was sure. She said, "I don't want to live here. I don't want Maggie to grow up not in our house. The bassinet is gone. The locks are new. The song hasn't followed us here. I want to go home." I asked her how she knew the song hadn't followed us. She said, "Because Maggie hasn't hummed since we left. I want to tell you about the next 2 weeks, but the next 2 weeks are not really the story. The next 2 weeks are us going home, sleeping in our own bed, putting Maggie down in a portable crib in our room until we could buy a new bassinet, and watching the camera feed at night on my phone while pretending not to watch the camera feed at night on my phone." Nothing happened. The camera caught 2 raccoons and a mail carrier. The window above the dresser stayed closed. The kitchen window stayed closed. Hannah and I made dinner and held our daughter and got reasonable amounts of sleep and pretended, for the most part successfully, that we had survived something. The song didn't play in our house. Maggie didn't hum. I want to tell you about the conversation Marissa and I had on Wednesday morning, 2 days after the night at my sister-in-law's. We met at a Starbucks 12 miles from Route 32, and we sat outside even though it was cold, and she told me what the man in the brown jacket had said to her husband. She said, "He said he was a friend of mine from college. My husband doesn't know my college friends. He let him in. The man stood in our entryway. He didn't sit down. He kept his jacket on. My husband was offering him coffee. I came down the stairs and I saw him, and I think I made a sound because my husband turned around and looked at me, and the man, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me, up the stairs. He said, 'How's your son, Mouse?' She paused. She said, and then he said, 'And tell your husband's friend the song knows the daughter.' And then he turned around and walked out the front door. My husband followed him onto the porch. The man got into a white box truck and drove away. My husband came back inside and asked me what the hell that was. And I told him it was someone from my old job. And I told him I'd handle it. He let it go because he could see I needed him to." She had her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold while she talked. She wasn't drinking it, she was holding it. I asked her what she'd done after he left. She said, "I went upstairs. My son was in bed. He was asleep. I stood at his door and I listened. He wasn't humming. He hasn't hummed in 2 weeks. I think when the man comes in person, the song goes quiet for a while, like it's recharging, I don't know." I asked her what we should do. She said, "I'm going to keep watching the pull-off on Wednesdays. I'm going to keep watching the station. If I see another pregnant woman, I'm going to get out of my car this time. I'm going to walk over to her. I don't know what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say something. That's what I'm going to do." I asked her what I should do. She looked at me. She said, "I think you should keep your daughter alive until she's old enough to know not to go back. I think you should never tell her about any of this until she's old enough to handle it. I think when she's about 16, you should sit her down and tell her that under no circumstances does she ever stop at the Shell station on Route 32. And you should make her promise, and then you should hope. That's it. That's all I've got." I asked her about the song, about the calendar, about Earl Vance Hadley. She said, "Hadley's daughter is alive. She's 61. She lives outside Memphis. I found her in 2019. I called her. I told her I'd heard her father's recording. I asked her what she knew. She told me her father had recorded the song for her, that it had been a song he wrote for her when she was 3, about taking the long way home from her grandmother's house, and that he'd recorded it as a private gift, and the record label had liked it enough to press it as a single. She told me her father had been a happy man. She told me he had not been crying when he sang it. He had been happy." I waited. Marissa said, "Then she asked me where I'd heard it. I told her. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked me if I had children. I said yes. She asked me if any of them had hummed it. I said yes. She started crying. She said, 'That's not my father's song anymore. Whatever you heard, it's not the song he wrote.' She set her coffee down. She said, 'She told me her own daughter, Hadley's granddaughter, had hummed it when she was 3. Her daughter is now 28. She lives in Atlanta. She's been pregnant once. She had a miscarriage at 16 weeks. Mrs. Hadley said she has spent a lot of years thinking about whether the song had something to do with that, and she didn't know, and she didn't want to know, and she didn't want to talk about this anymore.' She hung up. I haven't called her again. I asked her what that meant. She said, 'I don't know. I think it means the song is older than the station. I think it means it found Earl Hadley first, and it gave him 3 good years with his little girl, and then it took him on US 65 in March of 1968, because that was the deal. I think it means the song has been moving through families for a long time, and the Shell station on Route 32 is just where it shows up when somebody's pregnant and somebody else needs to be reminded. I don't know that. I'm guessing. I'm telling you what I've put together over 9 years, and I'm telling you not to trust it, because I might be wrong about a lot of it." I asked her if her grandmother had hummed it. She closed her eyes. She said, My grandmother died when I was 11. I never thought about it until you asked me just now. I think she did. I think she hummed something. I'm not going to be sure. I haven't let myself remember exactly. She opened her eyes. She looked at me. She said, "Did your wife's mother?" I told her about the conversation Hannah and I had had Sunday night, 2 nights after we'd come home, when we'd been folding laundry in our bedroom. Hannah had said, very casually, "I just remembered something." She'd said her mother had hummed a song to her when she was very small. She'd said her mother, Margaret, who'd died of pancreatic cancer in 2019, had hummed it to put her to sleep when she was 3 or 4. She'd said she hadn't thought about it in 30 years. She'd said she thought it was the song. She'd said, "I think she heard it before I did." That was as much as we'd talked about it. Hannah had said it standing over a basket of folded onesies, and I had said yeah, and she had said, "I think we should never play it for Maggie, even by accident, even on a video. We don't play that song." And I'd said, "Okay," and we'd kept folding. Marissa nodded when I finished telling her. She said, "It's older than the station. That's what I'm trying to tell you. The Shell station is just a venue. It picks up the song from somewhere, from satellite, from a family member who heard it once from God knows where, and it plays it when the right person is there, and the song gets into the kid, and then the kid grows up and the kid hums it to her kid, and that's how it moves. Earl Hadley's granddaughter lost a baby at 16 weeks. Maybe that was the song. Maybe it wasn't. The point is, the station isn't the source. The station is one of the places." She said, "There are other stations." I asked her what she meant. She said, "There are other places where it gets loud. Other gas stations, other diners, other parking lots, other rest stops. I don't know how many. I've found 3 so far. 1 in Virginia, 1 in Tennessee, 1 in northern Georgia. People on that forum mention them in passing without realizing what they're describing. The Shell on Route 32 is just the one we know." She finished her coffee. She didn't drink it. She poured it into the planter next to our table. She said, "I'm telling you because I think you're going to want to keep looking. I think you're not going to be able to leave it alone. I want you to know what you're getting into. I want you to know that this thing is bigger than one station, and that if you start going to the others, it will start going to you, not just to your wife, not just to your daughter, to you. And that is a separate kind of thing." I asked her if it had happened to her. She said, "I don't know yet. I'll tell you when I do." She got up. She put her coffee cup in the trash. She walked to her Civic. She rolled down the window before she pulled away. And I want you to notice that, because Marissa rolling her window down is the kind of detail my wife would have noticed. And she said, "Don't go to the other stations. Don't even look up where they are. If it's quiet at your house, leave it quiet." That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm telling you because I think you'll do it anyway. And I want you to remember, I told you not to. She drove away. I drove home. I want to tell you about the rest of that day because it's the day I'm ending on, and I want to tell it the way it happened. I got home at 4:30. Hannah was on the porch with Maggie. She was wearing a sweater I had bought her for her birthday in 2022. Maggie was in her arms in a pink onesie with rabbits on it. The light was the kind of late March light that is gold for about 20 minutes and then is gone. Hannah looked up when I pulled in. She smiled at me. It was a real smile. She said, "Come sit." She's been awake the whole time, and she's in a good mood. I sat on the porch. I held my daughter. Hannah held my hand. We watched the cul-de-sac. A neighbor's kid rode a tricycle down the sidewalk. The man across the street pulled into his driveway in a Subaru and waved at us. We waved back. For about 20 minutes, the world was the world. I want to give you that. I want you to have that in this story because we had it. We had 20 minutes on a porch on a Wednesday in late March with our daughter alive and our marriage held together with stitches that were going to hold, and the song wasn't playing anywhere we could hear it, and the bassinet was at the dump, and the windows were locked, and we were a family. At about 4:55, Hannah said, "I'm going to start dinner." She went inside. Maggie stayed with me. I sat on the porch with my daughter on my chest, and I watched the cul-de-sac. The Subaru man went into his house. The kid on the tricycle went around the corner. The street lights weren't on yet, but a couple of porch lights were starting to come on. It was getting cooler. I tucked the blanket up under Maggie's chin. 3 doors down on the right was a small white house I'd never paid attention to. An older couple lived there. We'd waved at them maybe 4 times in 9 years. Their name was on the mailbox, Peters, but I'd never spoken to either of them. The husband was retired military, I thought. The wife had a small garden out front. Their garage door was closed. It had been closed all afternoon. At about 5 o'clock, while I sat on the porch with Maggie asleep on my chest, the Peters garage door opened. Mr. Peters wasn't there. The garage was empty. There was no car. There was a workbench against the back wall and a lawnmower in the corner and a rolled-up garden hose hanging from a hook. There was a small portable radio on the workbench. The radio was playing. I want to tell you what it was playing. I think you already know. The chorus was the only part I caught from across the cul-de-sac because the volume wasn't loud and the wind was wrong for sound to carry. But I caught it. The long way home. The long way home. Steel guitar. A man's voice that sounded like he'd been crying, even though Hadley's daughter had told Marissa her father had been happy. The garage door stayed open for about 14 seconds. Then it closed. Mr. Peters never came out. I sat on the porch with Maggie on my chest, and I did not get up. I did not stand. I did not walk over to the Peters house. I did not call out to anyone. I did not do anything. Maggie, on my chest, in her sleep, made a small sound. 3 notes. Down. Unresolved. I held very still. I held my daughter very, very still. I did not breathe for what felt like a long time. I waited for her to do it again. She didn't. Her breathing went quiet and even, and the small hum did not repeat. And after about a minute, I realized she was asleep again the way infants are asleep. Completely. With no part of her aware of what she had just done. The garage door across the cul-de-sac stayed closed. I want to tell you what I did next. I want to tell you I got up. I want to tell you I went inside and I told Hannah. I want to tell you I called Marissa. I want to tell you I packed a bag. I sat on the porch. I sat on the porch for another 20 minutes with my daughter on my chest. And I watched the Peters garage, and the door did not open again, and the street lights came on, and the air got cold, and I realized at some point that I was crying without making any sound. The tears were going down the side of my face into the collar of my coat. I was not sobbing. I was not making any noise that would have woken Maggie. I was just leaking. Hannah came out at 5:30. She had a cup of tea in each hand. She handed me one. She sat down next to me. She put her free hand on Maggie's small back. She said, "Have you been crying?" I said, "A little." She said, "About what?" I said, "Just about this week." She said, "Okay." She didn't push. She drank her tea. I drank mine. I want to be honest about this. I did not tell her about the garage. I did not tell her about Maggie's hum. I have not told her either of those things. And I am writing this account 10 days later, and I have still not told her. I am telling you instead. I am telling you because I think I am going to keep going. I think Marissa was right. I think I am not going to be able to leave it alone. I think I am going to look up the other stations. I think I am going to drive to the one in Virginia first, because it is the closest. And I think I am going to do it on a weekday when Hannah is at the hospital and Maggie is with her grandmother. And I think I am going to tell my wife I had a meeting. I am telling you so that if I do, there is a record of who I was before I did it. I am telling you so that if something goes wrong in Virginia, My wife knows where to start. I am telling you because Hannah was right about the song coming from us, and Marissa was right about the song being older than the station, and Mrs. Hadley was right that whatever I have been hearing on the speakers is not the song her father wrote. And I think the only way I am ever going to find out what it actually is to go to the place where it gets loud next. The Peters garage door is still closed. It has been closed for 10 days. I have watched it from our porch. I have watched it from the kitchen window, which I have also closed and locked. I have watched it on the camera I had the contractor install on the back deck, which I repositioned last weekend so it covers the cul-de-sac. The door has not opened again, but every evening at 5 o'clock for about 14 seconds, even with the door closed, even with my windows locked, even with Maggie inside in her crib and Hannah inside in the kitchen, and the contractor's camera recording everything that happens in the cul-de-sac, I can hear the chorus. It is faint. It is across the street. It is real. And the strange thing, the thing I want to leave you with, the thing I do not understand and have not been able to understand, is that yesterday, for the first time, when I heard it, the chorus was not in a man's voice anymore. It was in a woman's, a young woman's. I have not played any recordings of my daughter's mother in our house. I have not played any recordings of any woman in our house. There is no reasonable explanation for what voice has started singing the chorus across the cul-de-sac at 5 p.m. Maggie is 11 weeks old, plus 10 days now. She is 14 weeks. She cannot sing. But the voice on the chorus 3 nights in a row has been getting closer to a voice I have heard before. I am going to find out whose it is. That is what part 2 is going to be about.